Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn session for the Hope and Healing Center CARES program. For those of you who are not familiar with the Hope and Healing Center, we're a mental health outreach offering support groups, individual mental health coaching, and educational programs. And CARES more specifically is for caregiving, aging, resilience, ethics, and spirituality. I'm Dr. Peggy Dademeyer, and I'm the director of that department here at the Hope and Healing Center. Joining us is Rabbi Seth Sander, our community aging specialist, and we're very happy today to welcome Dr. Jason Burnett, who's a gerontologist, associate professor of geriatric and palliative health at the UTHealth Science Center, and also serves as the co-director of the Texas Elder Abuse and Mistreatment Institute, or TEAM. He joined the faculty at UT in 2012 after earning his doctorate from the UTHealth School of Public Health. And you're in for a treat today. I've heard Dr. Burnett speak several times, and he has some exciting things to talk about on the importance of social connection. Take it away, Jason.
All right, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I can't see anybody, so I don't know. I guess if you can't, let us know. But you wouldn't know that I said that, so it doesn't matter.
I'd be getting chats that say no sound or no audio or and so forth. So I always default to our equipment is working unless I hear otherwise.
All right, perfect. All right, well, welcome. I want to spend some time with you today, just talking about something that I find to be extremely important. Not just because it's it's in the headlines, not just because the Surgeon General put out a report on it, but something that I've known for a long time, and I imagine you all know, have known for a long time, that when you're around people that you care about, when you're around people that you actually enjoy, and who are nice to you, and you're nice to them, I mean, it just makes a difference in how we're able to live our lives, how we're able to handle the things that come down the road. I mean, I wish I could say that, life is just all, sunshine and rainbows, but, we know that's not the truth, and hardships come. And when you have people there that can support you, that you feel confident talking with, that you feel that you have intimate relationships with, or on other personal levels, it's just better. Right. And in truth, we are better together in a lot of ways. And I'll put a asterisk to, by that, because, I do work mostly in the area of elder mistreatment. And sometimes that doesn't mean we're better together. That means sometimes we need, maybe we are good together. We just need a little bit of help being better while we're together, because, things can happen and life gets tough. But I'll move on. So, I don't have any conflict of interest here. I'm not being paid, and I always tell people maybe I'm doing something wrong, because nobody ever, is paying me for these things mostly, but that's all right. I really, truly enjoy giving these talks and having these conversations and spreading the word. And so with that, we'll go ahead and end the slideshow. We're done. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, but I'm only joking. I like to thank you up front for being here, because I know it takes time out of your day. It takes, you've got other things that you could be doing, but I really appreciate you being here. Really appreciate, hearing from you in terms of what you liked, what you didn't like, and how this may have helped you, or how this may help someone in your life have better well-being. So as we move forward, we'll cover some of the basics. What is social connection? Because it's not as simple as we may think. It's a little bit more complex of a phenomenon. So how do we make sense of that, of social connection? And a big question is, why do we face social disconnection? And why can it be harmful? Because we think, oh, okay, yeah, so maybe I don't have anybody around. We can think of some reasons why that may be harmful, but there's some other reasons maybe you haven't thought about that we'll discuss in terms of how it affects your health. And then we'll talk about how we can prevent social disconnection. And that'll come, we'll look at that from a variety of different angles. So we think about social connection. You may think about all kinds of things. I mean, there's a lot of terms that are thrown out there about what social connection is, but for the most part, it's about relationships. It's about, do you have intimate relationships? Do you have, these relationships where they're distant, somebody's far away, but you still contact them on the phone? Maybe they come to see you, maybe nobody comes to see you, and you feel you have social disconnection, or maybe somebody comes over and they're just there to help take care of you, right? Are you taking your medicines? Are you doing these things? Well, that's a social connection, that's a relationship, but that's what we would call instrumental support, right? An instrumental social connection. But what if you find that you really need to be connected to somebody emotionally and you don't have that? That can be disheartening, even in times when you want to share good things, not just bad things. Sharing good things has a really positive effect when you can share it with other people. So we have to think about these relationships a little bit differently. So when we think about social relationships, it happens on a continuum. We've got social isolation, we've got loneliness, and people talk about those things often interchangeably, but they are in fact different. Social isolation, that's more of your objective measure of those connections, those relationships you have. How many friends do you have? How often do you talk with them? How many family members? How often are you doing things in the community? You can quantify those things relatively easily. If somebody comes to you and says, well, Jason, how often did you talk with your really close friends this week? And I'm like, oh, well, I called Gene, and I called Michael, and we talked about 4 times this week. Okay, 4, right? And you can quantify that. And that value, we know, is associated with health. It's associated with immunology. It's associated with mental health, physical health, all sorts of things that we'll talk about later. But then as you move into that more subjective state, you get into loneliness, okay? Loneliness is that feeling of being isolated. And you might be isolated, you might not be isolated in terms of how many people are around you, right? You might have people coming in all day checking on you, but you can still feel very lonely because it's a subjective assessment of those social relationships and that difference between what you feel like you need and what you have. And so we think about the social connection framework, how we sort of are working to understand this complex phenomenon. We think about structure, function, and quality. And so in structure, that's really that social isolation. That's objective measure, right? That household size, that friend circle size. Are you married? Are you not married? And then when you get into function, it's, well, okay, what is that? What are those social relationships doing? How are they operating for you? Once again, maybe it's somebody just coming in and asking you every day, hey, I'm here, I'm home healthcare, I need to check and make sure you're taking your meds and this and this and that. Well, that's great that you have somebody asking you those things, but what if that's all it is? That can mean that maybe you need a little bit more. Maybe you do need this other emotional support. Maybe you would love to have a mentorship role, right? To give you back some meaning, some purpose in your life, give you, some sort of direction. And then some support in crisis. I mean, those are all types of functional social support. And then it comes down to quality. We know that, just because you're around people doesn't mean it's great. 33% of married couples report being lonely, okay, because they lack this sort of quality. So when we think about quality, think about positive and negative aspects of our relationships. So as I mentioned with elder mistreatment, you've got people living together. One of the biggest risk factors is cohabitation. And whenever elder mistreatment occurs, it's because more likely there's a negative relationship, there's negative interactions, there's contention, there's something that's negative that's leading to that outcome. So when we think about being alone versus being lonely, we know that being alone doesn't constitute loneliness. Some people can be alone and they're just fine with it, okay? There's times when we do want to be alone, okay? And we'll talk about solitude here in a second. But loneliness also does not constitute being alone. You don't have to be alone to be lonely. You can be in a crowd of people. You can be on a family trip and maybe just don't feel like you're connected to whatever's going on, or the people that are with you, or you're off thinking about, I've really got this problem that nobody understands, so I feel alone. So how we contextualize this is really important, and it's just not as straightforward as perhaps we would like it to be. So when we think about solitude, I always like to bring up solitude because, we all have different personalities. I know you can't answer this because you're all muted, but if you haven't seen it, maybe watch the movie Soul. If you haven't seen it, it's an animation movie.
Mhm.
Really cool movie. Because it talks about just sort of, people, like, it makes this sort of parody of, oh, look, people are designed and they have this, these personalities, and they realize, well, maybe that's not true. So we're all different in how we need to socialize and how much socialization we need, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. That's what makes the world go round. But, sometimes we probably all need solitude at some level, right? Something bad happens, what do? Sometimes we withdraw, we go, okay, let me figure out what's going on. And we try to collect our thoughts, and then we try to move forward with some sort of way of solving it or overcoming it. And so solitude doesn't always play a bad thing. It can return us to ourselves. I mean, think about how many different directions we get pulled. If you're in the workforce, even if you're not, you may be out doing things. Oh, I got to go to the store. I got to do this. You got a very busy life. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm extremely worn out. I need to step back because my brain is just, it's done. And so you need to step back and return to yourself and, okay, wow, I need, what am I missing today? Oh, I'm missing focusing on me. And focusing on you is perfectly fine. That doesn't mean you're narcissistic, doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you just need to get back to maybe who you are, because it's very positive. And we think about solitude, it's really a place where we get really productive. Okay. I like to think about, all the really classical music records, like, Bach, Beethoven, all those folks, they weren't sitting in some cafe, making music. They were off by themselves, some really isolated, really focused, doing this stuff. There's something really great come out of solitude. So it's not that we just need to be social all the time, but we also need to put caution around pretty much everything. We need everything sort of in moderation. Solitude can be a bad thing for us if we stay there too long, especially if we're not choosing to be there. Okay, and this is where it gets interesting, and it intersects with, health. People have functional impairments or cognitive impairments or socioeconomic status deficiencies, those sorts of things that can lead us to not being able to engage as we might want to. So all of a sudden we're forced to be socially disconnected because of our health or some other factor. When that happens, it leads to bad things, or it can lead to bad things. And I like to use this slide to talk about how when good things are made bad. Okay, once again, solitude can be a good thing, but there was a study, and it was done with these mice, and they were the exact same strain of mice. They took them. I mean, that's the beauty of science now, is they can go do these things that they call knockout mice. They'll knock out a certain gene, and it's like, okay, now we can study this one thing because we know it enough to know that we've knocked out this thing that's going to modulate it. But what they did is they had the exact same strain of mice, and one group got put into this one cage, one group got put in this other cage, and when they're in there, they're on this hamster wheel, or this exercise wheel, as you see here. Now, they were made to exercise, right? So they were studying the effects of exercise. And we all know that, you exercise more, get better benefits for bone health, cognition, diabetes, all these positive things come from exercising. Well, all these rats exercise at the same intensity, at the same, number of days, same time of day, all this, except what they found was that one group of rats got the benefits, and it was a stress reducer for them. This other group, it actually induced stress. And the reason was because one group was in control of when they had to exercise, how long they had to exercise. The other group was just waiting. And all of a sudden, oh, I gotta run, I don't know how long, I don't know how far, I don't know, any of that. So it became very, very stressful for them because it was a situation they didn't have any control over. So if you think about solitude, right? Once again, a good thing to be able to step back from, but if you have no control over it, it becomes something that can be very negative and bad for your health. Now, if you do have coffee, I'd say take a drink of it because we're going to jump into some statistics, but I promise it won't be statistics like that. They're going to be high level, but I have to give you the fair warning because folks sometimes, oh, statistics, and they immediately start snoring. That would be my wife, by the way. I'm going to send it to her. So, but before we jump into to those specific stats, if you didn't get to see, in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General put out his report. And I think it's phenomenal that, we have a U.S. Surgeon General who said, you know what, we want to focus on this social determinant of health rather than, hey, we want to just go in and solve diabetes and throw more drugs at things. What he said is, no, I've been around long enough. I've talked with enough people around the world and within our own United States to know that we have a problem with social isolation and loneliness. And it preceded the COVID pandemic. Okay, everybody always think, oh, well, COVID, what COVID did is it brought to light how impactful being isolated and lonely can be. But prior to COVID, there were still 28% of older adults were socially isolated. 28% of, 54 million, or it's about 54 million people. Okay, that's a lot. Okay, so he put out this advisory saying, hey, we got this problem, we need to do something about it. And there was some data, if you look at what we have here, what we found was that in 2018, right, prior to COVID, 27% of older adults, 50 to 80, reported social isolation, feeling socially isolated. And then, of course, we impose, COVID happens, we impose some restrictions, it jumps up to 56%, and then it starts dropping, and we're adaptable people, right? That's the great thing about humans, we can adapt, but guess what? January 2023, we're still at 34%, 7% higher than what it was prior to COVID. Okay, so although these numbers are going down, it's not anything to just jump up and celebrate about just yet. There was a really scathing article that came out of, I forget which journal it came out in, or which publication, but it really just came out and said, oh, all this is social isolation, loneliness. It's bull, but is basically what they said. They said, because look, the numbers are going down. And we're like, and then they used HIV and they said, the numbers of HIV, if they're going down, we would celebrate it. And we have these numbers going down, and why are we not celebrating? And what we're doing is we're saying we still got this big problem. And we're like, well, guess what? Yeah, it's going down. But if you impose restrictions on getting people connected, like you make them stay in their home, well, of course, when you pull that back, it's going to go down. But we're still higher than we were before. And it was still a problem before COVID. So it's not that we just need to be going up. We've solved the problem because we haven't solved the problem. And from 2003 to 2020, they've been looking at these issues for a long time. They've been looking at these different social connection trends. Since 2003, we've seen an increase of 24 hours per month of social isolation for people. Household family social engagement has decreased 5 hours per month. Companionships down 14 hours per month. Social engagement with friends down 20 hours per month. Non-household family social engagement, 6.5 hours. So we're just seeing all these trajectories going in the absolute wrong way. Yet here we are in a city of what, if we Harris County, probably 5.3 million people, right? But yet we're not engaging. We're living sort of on top of each other now, still not talking, still not engaging. And so there's some reasons for this. We've taken on this sort of idea. There's some factors that deal with birth rates, that sort of thing. But really we've taken on this idea now that, hey, we need to be individuals, right? Everybody needs to be so individual. We don't need help from anybody. We don't need, we're on our own. And where we used to do, take family trips that, you took the whole family, you got grandma. Has anybody ever seen National Lampoon's Vacation? No? Okay, well, watch it, it's funny. But it got this family that's going across the country with they got their grandma, got everybody, they got the station wagon. And so used to, you'd go on these trips with bigger families, people had bigger families. And now what we're doing is we're going, oh, let's go on a trip. Everybody can fit in this car. Great. You got 2 people, maybe a dog, unless you have luggage. So now, I mean, things are just changing in terms of how we're living. We used to live in these multi-generational houses. And now we're going up.
Yeah.
We want
Tiny
these
houses.
tiny homes. And that may not be as true because, prior to COVID, you probably saw those memes where people, they had that one meme that came out that said, oh, this house in the middle of the forest in the snow, would you live there for a year by yourself for $1 million? And everybody's like, yes, I would, absolutely. And then COVID hits and they're like, maybe not. Like, that doesn't sound fun at all, because I like to get out and see people, because it brought to light how important it was to be socially connected. And, we're seeing that baby boomers, they're more likely to be divorced. They're having fewer children. They have increased disability. And guess what? If you have increased disability, fewer children, you're divorced, well, your pool of family caregivers is shrinking. Okay.
Mhm.
And we already know that we've got a problem with getting family in to take care of us. It's unpaid for the most part. Then you got to go get these other folks. And granted, there are people that want to do it, but maybe all they're doing is giving you caregiving. And that's great, but what if you need more, like we talked about? And then we see trends like this, these Google trends, which I find fascinating, is we're actually trying to figure out where to meet people. Like, that's a Google trend question in 2023, where we're the most technologically connected but disconnected society, is we're asking where to meet people. So it's really shown that we've got some problems with social disconnection, and we need to really take it in consideration, because it's harmful to us. It makes people become unraveled in ways. And if you don't believe that, take yourself, go sit somewhere. And you may think that, oh, you know what, I'm going to isolate myself for 4 or 5 days and not talk, not have any technology, anything like that. You'll see how uncomfortable it can get. So when we think about this, Robert Sapolsky out of Stanford, he's done a lot of work. He does a lot of biological work, and he says, look, we're starting to live well enough and to get ourselves sick just purely social and psychological stress. And we do that day in and day out. We're running around. We're I'm going to be late to this. I'm going to be late to that. And 99.9% of the time, unless it's a surgery, probably not going to really hurt too much, right? So we're making ourselves sick. And when we're isolated and lonely, well, things tend to start happening. Our bodies, we're not made to be socially disconnected. We're made to be together. We're made to have, support one another. And we don't have that around, whether we are consciously or consciously thinking about it. There may be something happening unconsciously where our body's going, hey, guess what? This isn't normal, right? And so we start having these physiological reactions. Our hypothalamus to tell us, hey, guess what? Something's not right. So our homeostasis gets off balance. It starts telling our pituitary, going, hey, you need to kick out some hormones because we're off balance here. We need to get back into rebalance. And basically what ends up happening is it starts stimulating our adrenal glands. And our adrenal glands are good for fight and flight. Okay. And Dr. Sapolsky, he wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And you read it and you go, huh, why? Well, basically, their fight or flight response. That's all they do. If a lion's near, someone's trying to eat them, they're upset. If they're not, they're not. They don't sit around going, what if I'm gonna, somebody's gonna call me today, or if I'm gonna do this. No, they're in that situation, but what we do is we put ourselves in these situations, especially when we're lonely and isolated, to where our adrenal glands are constantly being bombarded with hormones. And when that's happening, it's making our cortisol levels go up. We start getting on these sort of cycles. Okay, our stress hormones go up, that increases our heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar. Then we may get some increased glucocorticoids. This is the sort of initial response, but and that's fine. That's that sort of, hey, we need to do something. But once we stay in this area too long, we start getting this sustained inflammation. Okay, and sustained inflammation is bad for us. That's all you hear. Hey, get off the refined sugars. Stop, smoking. Start doing all these things, because it makes your body inflamed, because you're putting these things in there that are causing harm. And same thing happens, and they've shown it with research, is that when people are isolated and lonely and they don't want to be, this same sort of stress response is happening. When they stay with sustained inflammation, they stay isolated and lonely too long, they may start getting cardiovascular disease. That's why we see the rates going up for cardiovascular disease by 29%. Diabetes goes up, cancer goes up, stroke, depression, frailty, all these things start to happen because we're isolated and lonely. Now, some other things that happen is we can start having poor cognitive performance. We see that people who are lonely, if you follow them over time, if they stay lonely, they have a 50% higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. Nobody wants that. They can become very pessimistic. Okay, as we start being lonely and isolated, and we start having those sort of chemical reactions to where, our hormones are getting off balance, we may not be thinking straight. We may not be thinking that, oh, you know what, I may not be thinking rationally about things. And so we may think, oh, it's just these other people, they get negative. And who wants to be around somebody that is just moaning and groaning and griping all day? You don't. You tend to go, oh, well, I'll be back tomorrow. And then it's like, well, I'll be back next week. And then guess what? They stay in that cycle. And maybe they end up getting some mental health problems, very depressed, very anxious. We see that in these folks. They also commit suicide, unfortunately. But then there's this really interesting thing that happens for people who are socially isolated and lonely. Sometimes they have this change in theory of mind. Okay, theory of mind is basically, if I'm coming in and I want to help you, and I'm actually your friend, you might go, no, you're just here to control the situation, tell me what to do, I don't want you here. But then they get a phone call from who knows who it is. They answer the phone like, oh, this person's my real friend. They just want to talk to me. All of a sudden they're sending gift cards. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So they lose that ability to judge intentions of people. And when you lose that ability to judge intentions of people, you might put yourself in a situation where you stay socially isolated, increase your risk, and all this increases risk for poor health. So once again, it increases risk for brain changes in terms of dementia, increases the risk of stroke, and by 29, or actually by 33%, and then for recurrent stroke by 40%. So people who are lonely, higher risk of stroke. And then in terms of mortality, actually increases that. That was the wrong slide, or the wrong graph. So mortality goes up when you're socially isolated and lonely. And so right before the pandemic hit, as I mentioned, this was a problem. This wasn't something that everybody said, oh, COVID-19 made this happen. COVID-19 made it worse. Okay. Prior to it, researchers were starting to understand that being isolated and lonely actually rivals smoking, obesity, and physical activity in terms of its health effects. Okay, so what do we see in the news? Oh, you need to be more active. You need to stop smoking, right? You need to not be obese. Well, guess what? Nobody's saying, hey, you don't need to be socially isolated and lonely, but they should, because it's rivaling those other three big major public health factors. Once again, it puts people at 50% increased risk in dementia and these other factors for depression and anxiety and suicide. But look at heart failure patients. Somebody who's had some heart failure issues, if you send them home to a place where they're isolated or they feel lonely, they're at 4 times risk of death, 6 to 8% risk of hospitalization, and 57% risk of another ED visit. So there's something happening in that social environment that's leading to these higher risks. And these folks who put this consensus out for the Center for Disease Control, they said, hey, we need to let our healthcare system know about this, because maybe we should get them active in taking a step towards helping solve the problem. So what are some of the solutions? I think, and we can get into, we'll talk about some, clinical, we'll talk about some, some other types of interventions, but I think what we have to build is this. In our communities, it has to be a universal community of hope. And when I think about hope, that's this idea that there's some good things coming in the future, and there's good circumstances coming, because when we start feeling hopeless, start feeling helpless, what do? We give up. If we give up, we lose those intentions to do things, especially those positive things. I mean, we got certain things that drive us, like, hunger and those sorts of things, but even those can go away whenever somebody's helpless enough and loses hope. We've got to get rid of all this. And, I know this is pie in the sky, and I wish we'd get rid of all the isms, but unfortunately, they're here. But I think we're making some progress. I mean, you think about like ageism. I think people are starting to say, okay, you know what? Maybe getting older isn't all that bad. We're starting to put a little positive spin on aging. We're starting to ask things in our healthcare system, across healthcare systems. What matters to you most? I mean, that's going, hey, you know what? You still have the ability to do things. We want to help you do whatever matters to you. And so we need to be better at eliminating these things. We need to be better at understanding, and dealing with trauma. There's a lot of trauma that's in our world. A lot of people have experienced trauma, and maybe the reason for the stress, the depression, the panic, the shame, all these sorts of things. We have to understand that we need to meet people where they are and not be judgmental about it, because all of these things can be precursors to loneliness, social isolation, and they can lead to it, or they can be causes of it. There's these other factors, right? I mean, there's a lot going on that puts us at risk, that we need to understand that, in the middle of all these things, there's a person. That person is who we need to tend to. And if we do that, what we do is we become that person, whether individually or as a community, that gives hope back to folks who feel like they don't have it anymore. I mean, I love this picture. I don't like to see it in my yard. Like you go through, you're like, okay, how did this one weed find its way through the concrete? Well, it's because there was a little bitty space for just enough sunshine for this thing to come through. And sometimes that's all it takes for a person, right? It doesn't take, a ton of stuff, but sometimes it is a little bit more complicated, right? There's all this trauma that maybe why this person's been is isolated or lonely. And sometimes it takes a group of people, okay, to help them put the pieces back together. And it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes time. So you got to have some compassion. You got to have some understanding, some patience with folks. And we got to build this into our community and be that bridge from darkness to light for people who may be isolated and lonely for a variety of reasons. And so we need to understand that, there is vulnerability there. We need to help people feel some social cohesion, get people reconnected back into the environments, the communities they want to be connected with. We need to build resilience. That's a huge factor. Okay. And when I think about resilience, I think about people, around people. I think the way that we build resilience is that we get together and we show people that, hey, you're not alone and we're here to support you. That doesn't mean you just rely on us totally, but having that ability to have some support is what can get people through some really, really dark times. And, you know, it's not, you know, we think about social isolation, loneliness, it's not all about depression, it's not all about negative mood. And it's not that simple. Okay. And I love this cartoon because they're like, oh, we'll just give you, take your, you know, replace your B negative blood with be positive, and we'll see if that improves your mood. But we know that that's not as simple. It's not that simple. And it's not as simple as, you know, finding friends in some pill box. You can't just give people a pill and go, oh, look, you're now gonna be social. You're not gonna not be lonely and isolated, because we know that, yeah, depression is part of it, but they're different concepts. They're not even highly correlated. Okay. So you can give people some meds and they sit in a room, they sit in the same room, don't talk to anybody. Those meds aren't going to work. Okay. They may work short term, but not long term. But truth is, friends don't come in pill boxes. But at the same time, I do think that it is not all that complicated. It can be complicated. And I don't expect that y'all have any idea who this is. And maybe y'all do, maybe not. Nobody generally does, so don't feel bad. Everybody always thinks it's somebody from Hall & Oates, but it's not. So John Prine, okay, he was a musician, and he actually died during COVID, unfortunately. But when he was 22 years of age, he was going around on a mail route. And when he would go around, he realized, you know, he would go and he'd see these older adults, and all of a sudden they would just start talking to him. He'd say, hey, how you doing? They would just start talking. And then he realized, he was like, wow, there's something going on. He said, you know, so he wrote this song at age 22 called Hello in There. And that's what he says, just say hello in there. If you see somebody, say hello in there, because that's often what's missing. And that's so simple to do. And it can create such a big impact on people. I just, all of a sudden they go, oh, look, somebody saw me. And that's huge. And we all want that. So while it can be complicated, it doesn't have to always be complicated. And I saw this sign one time. I was leaving Dallas, and I was leaving a meeting. I just happened to pull over and pulled right in front of the sign. I was like, wow, that is a cool, cool sign. Because this is exactly what we need to be doing in our communities to address social isolation and loneliness. Right up the top right corner says better together. 100%. I think we are. We need to understand that everybody's vulnerable, including ourselves. Because if we think that we're not, well, I mean, life may be good, but it can be not good in an instant. Okay. But also at the same time, just because it looks bad may not always be as bad as it seems. But we need to build this humanity, build this, you know, enrich our communities by getting people together, getting people to understand that we do have some commonalities. And one thing that we really, really, really need to do is normalize social disconnection in a positive way. Okay. And so what this means is we don't need people to feel like they're inept. We don't need people to feel like they're something less than what they are because they're isolated and lonely. Guess who has the highest rates of social isolation and loneliness? Teenagers. Okay. And you go, huh, why is that? Well, because it's a difficult time. It's a time where we don't expect that they would be isolated and lonely, right? Because you've got people, you're in college, you got all these things, but at the same time they're going, oh, I don't want to listen to mom and dad. I want to do my own thing. I don't know what that thing is. And I don't know which group I belong to. I don't know which. And so there's this existential sort of vacuum where it gets really lonely because you don't know where you're headed. But that's not a bad thing, because generally you pull out of it and you go in the direction, you build a meaningful life. And we need to make sure that people understand that it's not abnormal to respond to an abnormal situation of being social, isolated, and lonely. We are made for being social at some level. Okay, people are at different levels. That's why I like this quote by Viktor Frankl, his Man's Search for Meaning. I'm sure you both have read it or have seen it. And if y'all haven't read it, it's a really good one. But it really shows that, you know, if somebody has a why to live for, they'll endure almost anyhow. So you could be isolated and lonely, but if somebody says, you know what, I can see my grandchild one time this year, so I'm gonna stick it out. That might be enough for them, okay? But there's some other ways that we can address this, you know, and in Surgeon General's report, he talks about strengthening our local infrastructure and local communities. That's really important because when we think about how to do this, it is really, really not that simple. Because even in Houston, where we got all these people, we're just living close. What if you want to do something in your own community? It takes some doing, and especially takes some doing if you got people who live in that community, just in your neighborhood, who aren't able to get out of their home. What are you going to do about those folks? Because those are the ones who probably need it more. And we got to figure out, okay, how do we get them out of their home? How do we get them to this place? How do we get them to be part of our community? And that means building some social infrastructure. We need some, you know, enact pro-connection public policies, mobilize the health sector, which we're doing. We're doing a lot of that. And then, you know, reform the digital environments. We need to understand that, yes, technology is very helpful. It's very helpful keeping us connected, but it's not the end game. It's not the end all be all. We know that, you know, going and looking on social media can have positive effects, makes people feel connected. But what works even better is when somebody comes over, sits down with them, talks with them, gives them a hug, gives them a handshake, because technology changes, but people don't change as much. Need to deepen our knowledge about this issue, but also need to build a culture of connection. And this is really, really important. Building a culture where this is something we want to do every day. We want to go out and tell people, hey, let's be connected. And let's do things in ways that get us connected. And if you haven't heard of blue zones, well, here they are. You've got Loma Linda, California. You've got a place in Costa Rica, Italy, Greece, Japan. And what happened was Dan Butner, him and his colleagues were starting to study. Let's look at, you know, aging, and let's look at where people are living healthy and the healthiest. And what they did is they noticed that in these areas, these folks were thriving, even into late age. So the way they came up with blue zones, they actually took a blue pin and they circled these areas, and they're like, oh, look, now that's how they call them blue zones. But these folks were just doing so much better than the rest of the world. And it had something to do with nutrition, it had something to do with being active, but a lot of it has to do with social vitality, staying socially connected. These folks, you know, if you go to these blue zones, a lot of times you'll see folks who are out 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, all sitting out, talking, having a good time, because that's built into their environment. It's not, oh, it's 9 o'clock, we need to go to bed because we got to get up tomorrow, go to work, and we got to do all these things. What they do is they focus on making sure they stay socially connected. And that's extremely important because it gives people meaning, gives them purpose, helps them be seen, helps them be heard, and helps them be valued. And that's where it comes into, you know, as we interact with one another, we need to do it in ways that are empathy-based. We need to do it in ways that, you know, it's not all about, and I've learned this being married, it's not all about the response. It's just about listening. And you just listen, right? Because when you listen, that's a very important part of empathy, showing and going and validating, okay, I hear what you said, rather than giving a solution. And that's how you connect with folks. It's super important that we build this into our interactions. And when it comes to aspects of spirituality, you know, when you start thinking about, and this is not my area of expertise, but I've read, you know, what they're saying in the literature, which there isn't a ton on social connection just yet. I mean, they do talk about the importance of religion and spirituality, but they haven't delved into it to the depths they've delved into it in other areas. But when it comes to spirituality, right, it's really about having that connectedness, and I've seen it. So we work with older adults who they're termed, for lack of a better term, self-neglect. So these folks that are in our community who actually don't take care of themselves at the level that we all think that they should. They may be not bathing, may not be eating, they may not be taking care of their physical health. And when you go out there, and we did some interviews with them to talk about social connection, and when we did, what we did is we asked them about meaning and purpose. And anytime during that interview, if they made any mention of spirituality or higher power or anything like that, I could guarantee that they were not going to score depressed, and they were going to have high meaning and purpose. That's exactly what came out of the data, because they felt like they were. I mean, that's the really important part about being spirituality. It doesn't have to be that there's a higher being. It could be nature. It could be, I mean, all these things. We feel good when we get connected to something that's positive. It helps us grow personally, helps us be better. We think about religion. We think about these other aspects that are based on service, right? How important is it to provide service? That's that volunteer aspect. We see the volunteering in the greatest ways to reduce feelings of loneliness, social isolation. They go out and they volunteer, and they do things for folks. And we're interacting with people. The best way to get them to do something, even if that, I mean, when you're going and doing a service for somebody, hopefully you're not doing it because you go, oh, well, I want this in return. Because then that's not what we're shooting for, right? And what the literature shows is that if you sit down with somebody, if you do something good for somebody and it's heartfelt on their end, they feel gratitude, they have a much higher likelihood of actually going and doing something either for you or for somebody else, right? So it's giving them meaning, giving them purpose just by you doing a service for them that didn't expect any sort of contractual obligation. And, you know, and spirituality also helps people rationalize sort of the situations they're in rather than just become helpless and hopeless. And so to wrap up, there's some ways, you know, some of the best ways to knock down like one of the ageisms, or one of the isms is ageism, right? Ageism is a big factor that causes disconnection. What we do is we put all our emphasis on young adults, we put all our emphasis on children, and then we go, okay, you're 18, see you later. And then as you get into, you know, this older age, they go, okay, well, you retired. And oftentimes we just don't have as many services, we don't have as many, you know, many interactions with these folks. And we've seen that the best way to reduce that ageism and to make it a much more, much nicer environment and to build quality of life for older adults is to have intergenerational connections. And we've been doing some of that at the McGovern Medical School, connecting students with older adults, done some great things for elder mistreatment survivors, drop their loneliness, their depression, change perspectives of students. We're now doing that on a statewide level with adult protective services. We've got students who are making social contacts with social phone calls with APS clients around the state of Texas. And as part of that, what they're doing is as they're being that social connection for them, just being, you know, just having conversations with them at the end of every call, they do a little bit of mental health screening. At the end of that, if they score positive for needing some sort of maybe relief of anxiety, depression, PTSD, they'll then ask them, do they want to receive a call from our Trauma and Resilience Center for free mental health counseling? And 75% of them that meet the need say yes. And that's huge for this population of adult protective services clients who often refuse services, because we got a lot of self-neglect in this study. And so we're seeing that if you get in and show them something positive, connect with them, you'll see that they actually accept services more. We've connected students with stroke survivors. So that's worked out well. We just had a paper published on that. We just submitted a grant on that as well. We've connected students with older adults in our nursing homes. Some of the loneliest folks in our community, most vulnerable, are in our nursing homes. And so we've got students connected with them, going out and having conversations with them. And we've got a great story of one where he hadn't left his room in 7 years. Now his room was probably from here to that gate to get outside to the door. Hadn't left. We had a student match with him. He goes out and he visits with him 2 times a month for 3 months. And around the 7th, 8th visit, the guy says, hey, I think I want to go outside. So after 7 years, he goes out because the student had visited with him probably 6 or 7 times. Huge. You think that's, I mean, that's such a big difference that gets made through such things that seem sort of menial to a lot of us. And so what we're doing is we're leveraging all this stuff that we're doing now into a UTHealth Center for Social Connection. So we're building the center in the McGovern Medical School, where we're now taking health professional students from around the university. We'll be, taking students from universities around the city of Houston as well. And we're getting them connected with older adults, okay, to connect them to build these social relationships, because then we can figure out, okay, one, we can drop down that loneliness, that isolation, maybe hit some of that depression, some of that anxiety, but also figure out what do these folks need and maybe get them into the services that they need, or get the city or whoever to go, hey, let's build those services, because we don't know, if we don't know about what they need, how can we build it? So we're gonna start leveraging that. And this center is under construction, but then at some point we'll move into younger adults. And then we'll move into teenagers. I mean, that's the idea, is that we've, what we're known for at the School of Public Health is younger adults and teenagers. We don't focus on older adults, but we're starting with older adults because that's where I spend most of my time. So I want to leave y'all with just one video that has come out of this program where we've been connecting students with older adults. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes, so we should still be good on time. But this is a woman who we connected with one of our students 4 years ago, and they still talk, and they started talking on the phone. And you'll get to see exactly how that turned out. Uh-oh. Let me pause. Hold on.
Yeah, for this, you may need to go ahead and turn your sound on.
Let me, yeah, maybe so. Well, it may not work.
If you go ahead and turn your sound on Zoom, you may be able to go ahead and or if you unmute, you may be able to go ahead and get that sound going.
Yeah, let's see here. Unmute. No. That's not working. All right, well. Okay, well, I don't think it's gonna work. But let me.
Well, what I was going to suggest is if it's something that you can link, send a link my way, we can forward the link to that video,
okay,
along with the recording, and that way folks can go ahead and look at it as they have the opportunity.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, that's
so
no problem.
I'll forward that to you. It's really nice because what happened was, this lady that the student started talking with her, and when they started talking, the older woman, she talked a lot about suicide and depression, right? And Gabby, who's our medical student now, 4th year, when she was talking with her, she realized that after about 6 months, she wasn't talking about depression as much, wasn't talking about suicide. So she called and said, hey, I want to do a research project, or I want to do some research project. We said, okay. And so I said, what have you been doing? She said, I've been talking with this older woman. I said, okay, what happened? She tells me. I said, well, let's do that. Just go get your friends. And that's that first paper that I put up where we published and we dropped down loneliness and depression, was because of her having that conversation with this person, with Marcia, who you'll get to watch the video on when I send it around. But Marcia's story was her husband had died about 7 years ago. She didn't have anybody to talk to. She was like, I don't have any meaning and purpose. I just existed. And throughout that video, it's so heartfelt because she talks about how just having somebody call her, she said, it was nice to know that somebody cared whether you were alive or dead. It was nice to know that somebody was going to call you and they wanted to hear what you had to say. They want to hear about your day. You told them about your day. So you built this really nice friendship. And in the end, because we have this trauma resilience center, we were able to offer Marcia to get some mental health treatment to help her deal with the stress and the loss that just stay there. Because it doesn't matter if, you know, if I'm lonely because my spouse has died, I can try to put somebody in that place. You're never going to be able to do that. Somebody's got to learn to come to terms with it, to not get over it, but to get through it, to live with it, right? And she needed that. So we got her involved with our Trauma and Resilience Center, and they did a tremendous job helping her work through that. And it all happened because Gabby gave her a call and they built a relationship. And that's the power of connecting people and just being involved in folks' lives and helping drive down that social isolation loneliness. So huge problem for us. We need to address it. It affects our health in very negative ways. And we can do something about it. And we are doing something about it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And